Dear Mrs. Martin, I have struggled writing this letter. There are no words that can ever truly express my regret or my shame. Whether I stay in here for 1 year or 10 or 1,000, it can't change what happened. Dear Mrs. Martin, I hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Dear Mrs. Martin, there are only so many ways a person can say that they're sorry for what they did. Dear Mrs. Martin, I got a letter from Andrew saying that he spoke to you. Sherry and I had not been fighting. She was my best friend. We didn't always get along 100% or anything, but that doesn't mean we didn't love each other. She was more important to me than my own sister. Andrew couldn't know what we talked about or what happened because he wasn't there. He just feels guilty because a lot of it was his fault. Dear Mrs. Martin, Sherry lied a lot. I know you didn't know that, but it was true. There were a lot of things she never told you, and I think that you would think differently if you knew those things. I guess it's not important now, but it's true. She did lie a lot. To you and to Mr. Martin and to a lot of other people and even to me, and I was supposed to be her best friend. I'm not saying it made her a bad person, but she didn't always tell the truth, and I think that people should tell the truth. Dear Mrs. Martin, remember when Sherry almost flunked math and I helped her? I came over every night and we did our homework together. If I didn't love her, would I have done that? And when she wasn't asked to the 8th grade dance and I was, I didn't go and she came over to my house and we watched movies instead. Dear Mrs. Martin, I know today must be hard. I woke up thinking I could wish her a happy birthday. It's like I forgot what happened. But I don't forget. I don't want you to think that I would ever forget because that wouldn't be right. It was just, there was this one moment when I woke up where I thought I could wish her a happy birthday. Dear Mrs. Martin, I know this might seem strange. It's just, I felt the need to send you this. I have no relationship with my own mother, and I know that you and Sherry were very close. So please accept this card. Happy Mother's Day. Dear Mrs. Martin, Sherry had no friends other than me. I was not just her best friend, I was her only friend. I always stuck up for her, even when people said mean things about her. Like how she was easy, and the only reason she got dates was that she was easy. People said a lot of things about her, but it was all stuff that she wouldn't tell you. But people said things, like both Fisher brothers. Dear Mrs. Martin, since I came here, I never went to any of the church services they had. I was never a religious person, and I wasn't brought up going to church or anything. I thought starting now would be kind of hypocritical. But last Sunday, I decided to go. And I wanted to let you know that I prayed for Sherry and for you and for Mr. Martin and for John. And I prayed for forgiveness. I don't know if I'll go back again, but I might. Dear Mrs. Martin, I wrote this letter 12 times and then tore it up. Would you and your husband consider coming up here on a visiting day? I want to apologize to you face to face. I can't change what happened, but I can be sorry. Dear Mrs. Martin, I was hoping to hear back from you about Visitors' Day. Even if you won't come up, please let me know. Dear Mrs. Martin, I know you didn't believe me then, but I had no memory of what happened that night. It's true. We were both drunk and high. The lawyers made it sound like I knew what I was doing, but that's what lawyers do. They make things up. I couldn't afford a good lawyer, and so I had to have the one the court appointed for me, and he didn't really listen to what I had to say. And so sometimes it's the lawyer's fault the way things come out, and not the other people. I'm told that happens a lot. Dear Mrs. Martin, I just wanted to let you know that I have many friends who are very concerned about me. Dear Mrs. Martin, they were her drugs. Dear Mrs. Martin, Andrew was my boyfriend first. We had gone out for 2 years. I was in love with him. He was the first boy I was ever with. I thought we were going to get married. I know that we were only in high school, but I really, really loved him. And he said he loved me lots of times, and I believed him. I guess it's true that love makes us do really stupid things. Dear Mrs. Martin, I have now been here for 3 years. Every day I wish I could go back to that night. I'll be coming up for parole in 6 months. Dear Mrs. Martin, why? That's all I ask. Why? Dear Mrs. Martin, making me stay here won't bring her back. Dear Mrs. Martin, it has been 5 years, 9 months, and 3 days. Dear Mrs. Martin, my grandmother died last week. I asked to be allowed out for the day to go to the funeral, but they denied it. I just wanted to let you know that. Dear Mrs. Martin, Sherry hated you. Dear Mrs. Martin, Sherry loved you. Dear Mrs. Martin, Sherry never felt you understood her. Dear Mrs. Martin, I haven't heard from anyone in my family since I came here. Not my mom or my dad or my brothers or sister. They don't visit and they don't write me or anything. Dear Mrs. Martin, yesterday I thought about Sherry's 9th birthday party. She wanted a purple cake. Not just purple frosting, but actually purple cake. I remember how you told her you weren't able to do it and she was so disappointed. Then she cut into the cake and it was bright purple. She was so happy. It was good cake and we all had 2 big slices. I remember how you told us that you didn't use food coloring, but that you used Welch's grape juice. I guess that's why it was really sweet. I was just thinking about that. Dear Mrs. Martin, thank you for writing to me. I know that must have been very hard. I'm sorry, but I don't remember Sherry's last words. I don't even know if she had any. As I said, I don't really remember what happened. I'm sorry. Dear Mrs. Martin, I hope you don't mind me sending you this card. Merry Christmas. Dear Mrs. Martin, it has been 6 years. Dear Mrs. Martin, Sherry's favorite flower was lilacs. She loved the smell of them. She didn't like that they were only around for such a short time, but she said she'd rather have 2 weeks of lilacs than a year of anything else. I've never had a favorite flower. I like all flowers pretty much the same. If I ever had a garden or a yard, I'd probably plant vegetables. But I might have some lilacs too. Dear Mrs. Martin, I might be transferred, so the return address might be different if I send another letter. Dear Mrs. Martin, my brother Joshua sent me a clipping from the Granville Post. It was Andrew's wedding announcement. I wondered if you'd seen it. I was surprised at how thin he looked and how dark his hair had gotten. I don't know the girl he's marrying. It said they met in college. She went to our high school, but she's 3 years younger than we were. They're going to be married at St. Augustine's this summer. That's the big church next to St. Mary's, the Catholic school in Boynton. Even though we're not Catholic, my parents thought about sending us there because they thought we might get a better education, but it was too expensive. I think our school was pretty good. Joshua just started writing to me last month. I don't hear from Matthew or Courtney. Dear Mrs. Martin, do you still have the picture of Sherry dressed as Wonder Woman from Halloween? Dear Mrs. Martin, what was the name of the dog you had when Sherry was still in elementary school? He was a mutt, but wasn't he mostly golden retriever? We used to take him over to the pond by the elementary school that had the little stone bridge. He used to jump in and chase the crayfish. When he got out, he would jump on us with his muddy paws and get us all wet, but he was a sweet dog. What was his name? It was something like King, right? Dear Mrs. Martin, the dog you had, his name was Rex, right? I knew it was like King. Sherry told me that Rex could also mean king. Dear Mrs. Martin, I don't know if you knew this, but Sherry's favorite candy bar was the whatchamacallit. I'm not sure if I spelled that right, but it was her favorite. I wasn't sure if that was something you knew, and I guess it's not that important. Dear Mrs. Martin, I was sorry to hear about Mr. Martin. He was always very nice to me. I remember him taking me and Sherry to Sentinel Park and buying us custard from Mr. Freezy's. Mr. Martin said it was okay custard, but that the best custard was in Wisconsin, where he went to school. He said it was because the cows were close or something like that. Mr. Martin always knew interesting things like that. I still thought Mr. Freezy's was pretty good custard. Anyway, I'm very sorry. Dear Mrs. Martin, it has been 9 years. Dear Mrs. Martin, I wouldn't forgive me either. Dear Mrs. Martin, thank you. Sincerely, Angela Bain.